Here's a question that should bother you. Two people walk into the same store on the same day with the same amount of cash in their pocket. One of them walks out richer than when they walked in. The other walks out poorer. Neither one stole anything. Neither one got a discount the other didn't get. So what actually happened in those 10 minutes that split their futures apart? That question is the whole video. Because the difference between broke and rich isn't mainly about income, and it isn't mainly about luck. It's about a short list of purchases that quietly separate the two groups, purchase by purchase, year after year, until one person is standing on a pile of assets and the other is standing on a pile of stuff. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand something bigger than shopping habits. You're going to understand how wealth is actually built and destroyed, one receipt at a time, and you're going to see exactly which side of that receipt you've been standing on. Before we get into the list, understand why this matters more than almost any other money lesson you'll hear this year. Most people think building wealth is about a secret investment, a hot stock tip, or landing a bigger salary. Those things help, sure, but they're not the foundation. The foundation is what you do with every single dollar the moment it lands in your hand, especially the small, forgettable dollars that never show up in a budget spreadsheet. The 8 purchases on this list aren't random. They're the exact spots where broke habits and rich habits diverge, quietly, thousands of times over a lifetime, until the gap between two people who started in the same place becomes impossible to close. Watch closely, because you've almost certainly made at least 3 of these purchases this month without even noticing. Let's start with the first thing, because it's the one hiding in plain sight in almost every driveway in America. Broke people buy new cars. Not just any new car, the shiny one, straight off the lot, with that smell they pump in to make you feel like you've arrived. Here's what actually happens the second you drive it home. It loses something like 20% of its value in the first year alone, sometimes before you've even made your first payment. Picture handing someone an $8,000 stack of cash and watching them light a match to it, right there in your driveway, just for the privilege of a new car smell that fades in about 2 weeks. Rich people, the ones who are actually building wealth and not just performing it, tend to buy a car that's 2 or 3 years old, let someone else eat that first brutal drop in value, and drive it until the wheels fall off. They understand something simple. A car is a tool that gets you to money, not a trophy that proves you have it. Broke people buy the trophy. Rich people buy the tool. That's thing number 1, and if you've never thought about your car as a wealth decision instead of an identity decision, that alone could be worth tens of thousands of dollars over your lifetime. Here's the second thing, and this one stings a little more because it looks so responsible on the surface. Broke people buy the biggest house their lender will approve them for. The bank says you're pre-approved for $400,000, so you go find a house that costs $395,000 because, hey, you qualified for it. Feel that for a second. The bank isn't your friend calculating what's good for you. The bank is calculating the maximum amount of interest it can safely extract from your life over the next 30 years. Rich people buy the house they can afford comfortably, often well under what they're approved for, and they put the difference into things that pay them back. A too-big mortgage doesn't just eat your monthly income, it eats your flexibility. It's the reason people stay in jobs they hate, the reason they can't take the lower-paying job that would actually make them happier, the reason a single bad month turns into a crisis instead of an inconvenience. Broke people buy a house that owns them. Rich people buy a house they own outright, in every sense that matters, long before the deed says so. Now here's where it gets interesting, because thing number 3 is the one almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most expensive habit on this whole list. Broke people buy convenience, constantly, in tiny invisible slices. The delivery fee, the extended warranty on a $40 toaster, the bottled water at the gas station, the premium subscription tier they forgot they even signed up for. None of these purchases feel big. That's exactly the trap. Imagine a bucket with a pinhole leak. You'd barely notice the drip, but come back in a year and the bucket is empty. That's what death by 1,000 small purchases looks like on a bank statement. Rich people aren't cheap, and this isn't about never ordering takeout again. It's that they treat convenience as a deliberate trade, not a reflex. They ask a simple question before the small purchases. Is this actually saving me something valuable, like time I'll use well? Or is this just me avoiding a 5-minute inconvenience? Broke spending is reflexive. Rich spending is a choice made with open eyes. Multiply that gap by every day of the year, and you start to see how two people earning the exact same paycheck end up in completely different financial universes. Think about your own last week. The coffee you grabbed instead of making it home. The App Store charge you didn't remember approving. The extra few dollars for faster shipping on something that wasn't even urgent. None of those choices felt like a financial decision in the moment. That's precisely the design. Companies spend enormous amounts of money engineering the moment right before you pay so that it feels effortless, almost invisible. The one-click checkout isn't convenience for your benefit alone. It's also a wall built between you and the pause where you might have asked yourself if you actually wanted the thing. Rich spending rebuilds that pause on purpose. And there's a second layer to this one worth sitting with. Small purchases don't just cost you the dollar amount on the receipt, they cost you the future value that dollar could have grown into. $5 spent today isn't just $5 gone. It's $5 that will never get the chance to double, then double again, over the decades ahead. That's the part broke spending never accounts for, because it's invisible, sitting years in the future where nobody bothers to look. Thing number 4 is going to make some of you uncomfortable, and that's fine, because discomfort is where the useful lessons live. Broke people buy lottery tickets, scratch-offs, and long-shot bets, dressed up as hope. And look, nobody's saying a $5 ticket ruins a life. What ruins a life is the underlying belief that fuels it. The idea that wealth arrives through a single lucky moment instead of being built. That belief is expensive because it changes everything else you do. If you believe your financial future depends on a lucky break, you don't build a budget. You don't automate your savings. You don't bother learning how a Roth IRA actually works, because why study for a test you think you're going to win by accident? Rich people, on the other hand, tend to obsess over boring, repeatable systems. The same modest contribution to a 401k every single paycheck, on autopilot, whether the market is up or down, whether they feel motivated or not. It isn't exciting. It doesn't feel like a scene from a movie. But compound growth on a boring, consistent contribution beats a jackpot fantasy in basically every real scenario that plays out over a working lifetime. The lottery ticket sells a dream. The automatic contribution builds an actual life. And this is the part most people miss entirely. So pay attention here, because thing number 5 connects everything else on this list. Broke people buy status. Not a house, not a car, status itself as a category, wrapped inside dozens of smaller purchases. The logo bag, the watch that costs more than a used car, the sneakers that sat in line for hours to get. There's nothing wrong with liking nice things. That's not the point. The point is what's actually being purchased underneath the object. When you buy something specifically because of what it signals to other people, you are, in a very real sense, buying their opinion of you. Feel the weight of that for a second. You're handing over real dollars, dollars that could compound, dollars that could buy freedom, in exchange for a stranger's fleeting glance and a silent assumption about your bank account. Rich people, especially the ones who built their money instead of inheriting it, tend to get strangely quiet about status once they actually have real assets. You'll find people worth many millions of dollars driving something completely unremarkable, wearing a plain watch, because they've already answered the question status shopping is trying to answer. They don't need the object to prove the point anymore. The house, the car, the crowd that once needed convincing, none of it matters once you stop performing wealth and started actually holding it. Let's talk about thing number 6, and this one is sneaky because it disguises itself as smart shopping. Broke people buy things because they're on sale. 50% off feels like free money. It feels like winning. But a sale only saves you money on something you were already planning to buy. On everything else, a sale is simply a very effective machine for creating a purchase that didn't need to exist. Picture a fishing lure. It doesn't matter to the fish that the hook is shiny. What matters is that the fish bites. A sale sign is the shiniest lure in the entire store, engineered by people who study exactly how your brain reacts to the color red and the word today only. Rich people shop from a list they made before they walked in the door, and they treat sales as a bonus on items already on that list, never as a reason to create a new one. That single habit, deciding what you need before you're standing in front of the display, closes off an entire category of leaks that broke spending runs straight through. Thing number 7 is short, but it might be the loudest one on this list if you actually sit with it. Broke people buy the newest phone, the newest console, the newest version of anything, every single cycle, because staying current feels like staying relevant. Here's the sensory version of what that actually costs. Take the difference between last year's phone and this year's phone, roughly the difference in speed you'd barely notice in daily use, and imagine that gap in dollars sitting in an index fund instead, quietly growing for 20 years while you're not thinking about it at all. That's not a hypothetical trick. That's simply what happens to money that isn't spent chasing a marginal upgrade. Rich people upgrade when something breaks, not when something releases. It's a small shift in timing that turns into a massive shift in outcome, because you're not fighting the item. You're fighting the release calendar the entire industry built specifically to make you feel behind. Now for the 8th thing, and this is the one that ties the entire question from the start of this video into a bow. Broke people buy insurance against being seen as broke. Read that again, because it's the whole engine underneath everything else on this list. Every item so far, the car, the house, the small conveniences, the lottery tickets, the logos, the sales, the upgrades, every single one of them can trace back to a single quiet fear, the fear of looking like you don't have enough. That fear is expensive precisely because it's invisible. Nobody writes fear of looking poor on a receipt. It shows up disguised as a car payment, a mortgage that's too big, a bag with a logo on it. Rich people spend money too, plenty of it, but they've largely stopped spending it to manage what strangers think. Once that fear stops driving the spending starts pointing somewhere completely different, toward assets that pay you, instead of objects that just sit there depreciating while quietly whispering a message to everyone who sees them. So go back to that opening question. 2 people, same store, same cash, same day. One walks out richer, one walks out poorer. Here's the aha moment, the thing that reframes everything you just heard. It was never really about the store, or the item, or even the price tag. It was about which one of them was shopping to solve a feeling, and which one was shopping to build a future. The broke purchase and the rich purchase can even be the exact same object, bought for 2 completely different reasons. One to quiet a fear, one to grow a number that keeps growing long after the store closes for the night. That's the whole secret hiding underneath every item on this list. It was never really about what they bought, it was about why. Once you can see that difference, you can't unsee it. And that's genuinely the moment your own spending starts to change, quietly, purchase by purchase. Exactly the same way it changed for every person who ever crossed over from one side of that receipt to the other. You don't need a windfall to start. You don't need a raise, a lucky ticket, or a rich relative. You need the next purchase you make, whatever it is, to be answered honestly with one question. Am I buying this to solve a feeling? Or am I buying this to build something? Ask that question enough times, at enough checkout counters, over enough years, and the gap between the 2 people who walked into that store on the same day stops being a mystery. It becomes a decision you make on purpose, every single time you reach for your wallet. If this helped you see your own spending a little differently, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe.